Thank you very much, Oliver. Nice to be here.
Brendan, Sea Moroney's video, you're not happy about the way it was edited. You say that the fish processors aren't trying to push out the Irish fishing industry, but in the video it seems to come across that that's what you said. Is that how you see it?
That's certainly the way that the video was edited. Bearing in mind that the recording lasted for 1 full hour and it's edited down to 17 minutes. Well, never in my 7 months in this job have I ever advocated separating of producer and processor. I have endeavored at all times to have the industry completely united and as one, because the reality is we are a small industry in comparison to our EU coastal states. We're an industry that's under massive pressure that hasn't been helped by the TCA and Brexit. So whatever future we have, be it processor or producer, our future are intertwined and directly linked. And the narrative that came out of that interview shook me in the sense that there's a perception that the processors are anti-catching sector. That couldn't be further from the truth. As processors, we can only survive if the catching sector is strong and robust. And that is the reality of the situation. Now, a lot of what's in the video is based on conjecture, and there's strong references to some super factory that's been proposed for the southern part of Ireland. I had no vision or no forewarning of that when I went into the interview. I spoke directly as what is my job, to talk about the processing sector, to talk about the outcomes of the task force and the future for all 160 processors in the country. But just to reiterate again, it is going to be critically important in the months ahead that both the processors and producers and the inshore and all sectors of the Irish fishing industry remain united if we stand any chance of getting a degree of fairness restored into the industry. And when I talk about fairness, I'm talking about the realities that facing all sectors of the Irish fishing industry. And that's the grossly unfair situation with quotas, the massive hit that we have sustained because of Brexit and the TCA, and the unlevel playing field that we have in terms of the rules and regulations that are forced on us daily when we see elsewhere other coastal states having a much easier regime when it comes to regulatory rules.
Is there a plan along the line? There is, like we've seen that there's 90 million being set aside for the processors. Is that 90 million, how is that going to be used? Can you explain that?
I can explain it very easily. The Brexit Adjustment Reserve Fund, which this money is coming from, is an initiative of the EU. 5 billion was set aside at EU level, of which Ireland got just over 1 billion of that. The task force was set up by Minister McConnell on the foot of that, and that brought 23 from the fishing industry, from the community and from aquaculture together in order to put together a strategy of recommendations to how this would be spent. Through that process, I, along with the others at task force level, made different submissions to the task force, and I made a submission encompassing all 160 processors in the country and asked for 120 million in the revised submission that I made, of which the task force as a whole recommended 90 million to be given to the processing sector. Now that will be spent in capital investment to add value to the products that we are landing into these factories, for diversification and to future-proof the entire processing industry so that the realities of Brexit, the fallout of Brexit, which means less fish for the imminent future, that we can build our businesses and sustain the businesses, and most importantly, the employment that's there within the coastal communities. So that 90 million will be opened to a fund, and applications will be invited by the BIM. I'm hoping that'll happen before Christmas, but that'll be freely and readily available, subject to rules and conditions, of course, to the existing 160 processors that are currently operating within the state.
Now, one of the statements that was also made in the video documentary was that it kind of came across that the seafood sector task force was kind of loaded towards the processing industry rather than the catching sector. And one of the statements that was made, that you said that the four producers' organisations didn't agree, and that's why the fishing industry lost out. Do you still stand by that statement?
Well, the first thing in terms of that the task force was loaded by the government or whosoever nominated people, that it was loaded with processors. The reality is there was just 2 processors out of 23. Now that's a very small minority. There was 4 from the producing side, from the catching sector, and then there was cooperatives, community people, and so on and so forth. Now, it was a lot easier, I suppose, if you look at it objectively, for the processing sector, because there was only 2 of us, myself and the representative from the IFA Agriculture, which is also processing to a certain degree, but it's agriculture, of course. So it was easy for us to get consensus of where we were going with our various proposals and initiatives that we brought to the task force. And as I said in the course of the interview, everything is relative. And if you have 4 organizations representing 4 different geographical areas of the country, different segments of the fleet, then of course logic follows that it's much more difficult to get consensus there. But we weren't dealing with an equal situation. In the terms of where I was coming from as a processor, we were trying to modernize the processing factories. We're trying to bring in diversification right across all sectors, be that whitefish, shellfish, and pelagic. And so we were on a different focus, whereas unfortunately for the producing side, they were dealing with real-time cut, which TCA and Brexit imposed on them. And the opportunity for them to bring initiatives that fitted the state aid rules, and this is where I was really getting at, and unfortunately it was edited out of the piece that I did, that had there been more flexibility within the state aid rules, then there would have been greater opportunity for the producing side. It's already fine for me or for anyone else to over criticize anyone, but the reality is, same for me, and it was the same for the producer organizations. We were working within set rules imposed on the task force by, 1, the EU, and secondly, by our own department. So I had greater flexibility, and that's what I refer to in relative terms, than the producer groups had.
The editing had a lot to do with what came across in it.
Well, obviously, it stands to perfect logic that if you do an hour-long interview, and I'm doing a substantial interview with you here now, Oliver, but if you go home and you're creative, absolutely everything I would have said to you can be changed in dynamic and in outcome by cutting a piece out here and a piece there. And you could easily portray me in a much different light than in reality what I have said here. Those are factors of any interview that you give, be it on a podcast or on radio. Once you give an interview and you hand it over, you do so in good faith. And the outcome of it can be entirely different depending on how or not it's edited. But the reality is, and I would like to address the reality, is that the processing sector, or for that matter, the catching sector, the producers, neither one of us can survive without the other. And both of us must focus on the reality that's before us, and that is that we're an extremely hard-hit nation in maritime fishing terms. And the outcome of Brexit has disproportionately hit us. That hasn't been addressed at political level. Yes, the task force was set up. Yes, we got $1 billion. That's going to be shared among other sectors, but there's an ambition there to spend 424 million of it in the marine sector. But the reality of burden sharing, whilst it's still on the agenda, it still hasn't delivered anything. And I refer to that in the interview, that where we need to focus right across all sectors of industry, all sections of industry, is that we need to focus at making our argument at EU level to restore the losses of Brexit TCA, and to better make the argument of why we as an island nation with 12% of the EU waters are a minority shareholder in the waters that surround this island, and across different species of fish and quota, our quota rights are very disproportionate to our other coastal member states in the EU that can catch multiple times the quota that we can catch as the island nation in which the waters surround. That is what's grossly unfair, and unfortunately, videos of a sensational nature, such as Mr. Moroney's, don't help that. And the only net beneficiary of the sensationalism that we saw on Saturday is the department. The department must be laughing themselves off their seats at how stupid we are as an industry, as in a section that has allowed that to happen. We must be microscopically focused and fully united in delivering what we must, and that is better quota share, more fair and equitable access to the stocks that surround the island in the Irish waters, or EU waters, if you interpret it from the EU treaties. And that is the sole focus of me and all the others in moving forward.
You mentioned that you would have a good relationship with Taoiseach, Micheál Martin. Is he listening to us? Like, in all seriousness, there doesn't seem to be very much of a conversation going on there. You don't hear very much from the Taoiseach talking about the fishing industry, how great the fishing industry could be, how great the Irish fishing processing industry could be. There's no word of that. He's never ever come out in public on TV and backed the fishing industry. He's backed a lot of other industries. He's backed new age technologies. He's backed the farming industry. He's backed everything else. But he's never publicly come out on TV and actually said, I'm backing the Irish fishing industry. I'm backing them in the battle of Europe. Do you want him to come out and say that? Is that something that has to be said by the Taoiseach in order for the fishing industry, the processing industry, everybody involved to have a little bit of confidence in the future?
That's a very fair question. And in actual fact, Oliver, there's so little of it I can disagree with you in terms of what you've said, that he hasn't actually publicly come out and given an endorsement to the fishing industry. It's something that I have asked for, particularly at this critical time. Yes, I do have a good working relationship with Taoiseach. I have in the past on many occasions both praised and criticised him in equal measure, but that's the tendency of my nature. I say it as it is. Where we are now, without overly focusing on the distraction of last Saturday, where we are now is that we have a task force that contains 17 different recommendations that has the ambition to invest over 400 million into the industry. I think that's the natural platform which the Taoiseach and the government can use in order to restore confidence in the industry. Since April, and prior to that, since December, when the TCA was signed by our EU colleagues and ourselves, this industry has taken a massive hammering. And the confidence and the frustration levels reflect that. There is growing anger within all sections of the Irish fishing industry, and that's justified. That is 100% justified. And at the same time, we've had the minister, in my view, remain far too silent and lacking in political leadership. I've written about that previously. I've spoken to you about that previously. But we have to put that aside at some stage, and we have to come together as representatives of industry and those that lead at political level and draw a line in the sand and move forward. I think the launch of the various initiatives that are contained in the task force would be a natural time to do that. But if we're going to do that, we're going to have one hard, frank discussion across the table from the minister and from the Taoiseach if needs be, and anyone else in the government that wants to listen, that what has happened to the Irish fishing industry since December particularly, but over the last 25 years, needs to be addressed. If you look at the statistics from Eurostat in terms of processing, and I am a representative of the processors, it's very bleak reading. We've gone from a situation where we were in the top 3 of the EU states in fish processing down to the bottom 2. We've lost all benchmarks of competitivity, capacity, and capability. That is through no fault of the processors. There's massive ambition right across the processing sector in Ireland at the present. And that reflects in the various surveys that BIM have done. And these processors are still willing to invest heavily in their business, to sustain the employment, to sustain the business model that they have. But at present, they're doing that in spite of government policy and in spite of support that's not there from the department and or minister. And I don't mean to be overly critical, I'm just reflecting the realities as we see them. But the task force brought industry and communities together, and through hard work and 14 different meetings, we have set a template that if we all buy into and that we all genuinely back in a real and meaningful way, it can shape a future whereby the Irish industry will slowly and gradually get back to the position that it should be. Now, we're far off that, and there is going to be major discussion and battle at national level and European level in order to get us there. And there's going to be no quick fix to this, but it's going to be impossible to do if we don't start. And that is what's motivated me in the last 7 months since I've been in this job, that we can't allow more of the same to continue. There has to be a different pathway. You can't continuously do the same thing over and over and again and come up with the complete failures that we have experienced in European terms for the last 25, 35, maybe 48 years. We have to change the future because the past has let us down. And that is where the demonstrations in Dublin and Cork give a new momentum and give absolutely unity to the industry. And that's what angered me so much about the edited clips of the last weekend. That has the potential to destroy all the good work that we have done and undo the agreed pathway that I see and others see within the industry, that where the pathway that we need to travel in order to get to where we should have been, never mind where we go beyond that. And that these conspiracy theories, whilst they're sensational in nature and they're a 48-hour wonder, they actually don't contribute anything to the debate or discussion or argument other than more frustration and more anger. We need to get that out of it, and we need to work as one. And we are working as one. I represent processors, others represent other sectors of the fishing industry, but we're all solely and completely dependent on one another. Otherwise, we're going nowhere.
A lot of our problem is, and then the industry, is that we're never getting the national coverage that is required. Commissioner Sinkevičius was in Killybegs a couple of weeks ago. There's an opportunity there for a lot of local press to be there, a lot of national press to be there, and nobody turned up. Now, that's not a very good impression for the man who's in charge of the big stuff in Europe when he lands in the top fishing port in Ireland, that there's nobody there. You know, where are we going with this? We can talk about it amongst ourselves a lot, but until we get our voices heard nationally, and as I say, like until Taoiseach comes out and backs the industry, where can we take this in the meantime?
Well, where we must avoid to go is down the traditional rabbit holes that we've been for the last 20 years. And what we've seen last Saturday, that's another rabbit hole. So those things have to be avoided. But what you've said is 100% correct. If it was any other commissioner from any other sector of the EU that visited Donegal, there would be hype and there would be media attention. And it's one of the things that I find very difficult to understand for a sector that provides over 16,000 jobs in coastal, maritime and peripheral regions. That is a significant jobs footprint. And from that, others are sustained and so on and so forth. But it never ceases to amaze how difficult it is to get a positive news story out in terms of the fishing industry. It's very difficult to understand that, but the reality is that it has been so much negativity generated against us, wrongly generated against us, and you see that, and I've seen it unfortunately, where you have negative leaks that have neither basis in law or fact, that those have damaged the fishing industry. And that is what we've been focusing on for the last 6-7 months, is to put together a positive news story about Irish fishing industry. And in fairness, many people have worked on that over the last number of months. That is where we need to go. The task force report is an important step on that pathway, and that should be the starting point for resetting the dial in order to make the relevance of the Irish fishing industry known clearly to all. And I think the Taoiseach and the Minister and all other politicians that have an interest in the fishing industry have a role to play in that. But at present, we're at a very low ebb within the industry, and the way back is, it's not going to be an easy pathway, but the first steps have to be taken, and we have to do this in unity, and we have to do it as one industry, because in relative terms, and I keep talking about the relativities, but you can't survive in life without being relative, and the relative terms is that we are a very small industry within our own nation. That's the reality, but still a very significant player, because we do provide 16,000 jobs. But in terms of European fishing industry, unfortunately, we have slid considerably back. Those are challenges. Now, every challenge in life can be overcome if we have unity, which we have, thankfully, and the resolve to improve the situation, which we must do. And that will be both ourselves as industry, but more importantly, our political leaders. And that is where we need to focus our attention on at both the minister level, Minister McConnell-Logue, and the government, because there's a lot more that they could do than they're presently doing. And I've been heavily critical of them in the past, and I will continue to be until such time as I see real and meaningful engagement from them, and more importantly, from them, a defence of the Irish fishing industry at European level. That is where the challenge is. We have to fight back at European level, and we have to fight the injustices that are clearly evident in terms of our quota, in terms of access to the various stocks that are surrounding this island, and we have to get a deal that respects the fact that we have 12% of the EU waters, but that's not reflected in their quotas that we have at present.
Going back to the video documentary again, the Spanish, is there a deal to buy fish from Spanish boats in Castletown Bear?
When you see, I always talk about logic in life, you know, and if you spend 90 seconds just analysing what you just said, Oliver, and I'm not being condescending to you, Oliver, but are we going to buy fish from Spanish? Well, let's look at the facts. The Spanish can waltz in and waltz out of every port, pier and harbour in Ireland at the minute and take whatever they've caught off the vessel into the back of the lorry and bye-bye Ireland. Do you think they're going to surrender that right to weigh fish upon landing, to be monitored as they enter into factories like what we Irish are doing, and all the regulations that each of us as processors or producers are subject to? Do you think that they're going to give that up to go through the hassle that we have to do on a daily basis? Well, not for a month of Sundays would they even contemplate it. That's the first thing. The second thing is you have to look at the price differential between Ireland and Spain. Are you realistically saying to me and saying to the listeners that the Spanish will do business with the Irish and give their catch to us at 20 or 30% less than what they'll get if they brought it back to their own country? Well, not a hope in hell. You have to apply the basic principles of logic to everything that you suggest in life. This suggestion or conspiracy theory, whatever you wish to call it, has got no basis in reality. It's a non-runner. There's no such proposal. They may have had in 2016, 2017, a collaborative or cluster examination to see was this viable, but within a very short period of time, it became self-evident and clear that it wasn't viable, because the Spanish have a very robust processing sector themselves. They process fish indeed differently to what we do here. And they have a cosy bilateral, which they can work through the French and the Belgium, with Ireland that makes them subject to very little rules or regulations that we are subject to ourselves in any case. So we were asking them to surrender all that to engage with us as processors. Well, it wouldn't take much logic to do an assessment in that it was a non-runner.
This thing that we call Donegal Catch was bought out by the Irish Investment Strategic Fund for 250 million. Did these things happen, or is this just another theory?
Well, first of all, Green Isle are members of my association and very valued members of our association, and Donegal Catch as a brand leader, and they're a significant buyer of whitefish in Ireland. I think over 30% of the whitefish caught in Ireland are bought by Green Isle Donegal Catch. So they're a massive contribution to the Irish fishing industry, and we must respect that. Now, as a CEO of any association, I'm not at liberty to go into the details of the workings of any of our members, but the reality is, however any of my members are funded or how they are operating is subject to public record. They're all limited companies. They do tax and file returns. All of that is public knowledge, but it's not a matter for me to be discussing here or anywhere else. And that is what I highlighted to the previous interview that I was on, that it's inappropriate for me as a CEO to delve into. All matters relating to companies are matters for the public record. They're filed and returned with the Companies Office, with the Tax Office. And this matter was addressed at length by the managing director of Green Isle in a recent press interview he gave. He was very clear, very honest, and very frank. So beyond that, I'm not going to go into the financing of any company, but I do want to put on the record that I think it was very wrong, completely wrong, to single out Green Isle. Green Isle are making a massive contribution to the fish industry. They have diversified, they've value added, they've created from a very small start a niche product that's recognizable in every household in Ireland. And that should be respected rather than singled out for sensationalism and the vitriol that I saw online against this company. That's wrong. That must not be tolerated. And I want to again compliment Green Isle and the management that's there and the staff that's there. There's 110 jobs in Gurteen, County Sligo, dependent on Green Isle. And it'd be very wrong of me or anyone else not to recognize the significance of that in a small community such as Gurteen. And we must support that. And any other normal country or maritime coastal state, that would be welcomed rather than doubt cast on it, which we saw in the last 48 hours. That's regrettable. That goes to the pits of my stomach in anger that was allowed to happen. That should not be happening.
The reform of the Common Fisheries Policy. This is going to play a major part in the future of the Irish fishing industry, of the Irish fish processing industry. But moving ahead, our fishing size capacity will be smaller. Irish fish processors will be importing raw material from abroad. Is that a certainty?
Well, we have to deal with the realities at present. At present, we're members of the EU. Most of us dislike that because we come from a fishing background. But that gives freedom of movement. And we have to accept that there were and are and will be vessels from the Irish fleet that will land into other nations. We mightn't like it, but that's a reality. I've never criticized anyone for doing that. By corollary, I don't expect anyone to criticize any processor if they reach out to Denmark or to France, Germany, or any of those coastal states in order to get fish into this country. That's free market forces. That is one of the benefits of being part of the EU, that we have the right to trade freely with other member states. So I want to address that because it's one of the things that I've been criticized for saying, that processors will have to get catch from other member states. Well, that's a reality. Unfortunately, that's a reality. And why is that a reality? Well, it's a reality of two things. a flawed common fishery policy since 1983, worsened by the TCA agreement of 2020. But we have to balance that argument that both on the fleet side, there is freedom to trade with other member states, and on our side, the processing side, that same freedom is there for us to trade with other states. And until such time as we restore the cuts of the TCA, and I'm not saying that we are going to restore them, but until we have clarity as to what burden share really entails, the Irish processing sector will have to reach out in order to top up what's lost. Because at present, this year we've lost 22 million of fish. That's going to progressively grow until it's 43.9 million. Unless we're going to allow processing plants to downscale, to cut jobs, some even to close, unless we're going to allow that to happen, and I'm not advocating that that's what's going to happen, but unless some people are saying, don't buy fish elsewhere, buy Irish fish. But the reality is, through no fault of our own, from the catching side or from the processing side, we're not allowed to catch them. So therefore, all these 160 processors that were trading prior to Brexit occurring were trading on the basis that we had X amount of quota. X amount of quota no longer exists because it's minus Y. And Y, as we know, is 44 million euros of catch each year, up to an cumulative loss of 215 million by 2026. So we are in an awful position. The producing side are in an awful position also because they have lost it too. And in order for us, because these processors would have built up market share in other countries, they would have built up a model that sustains their processing facility and the number of people that are traditionally employed there. And unless we get that loss of quota elsewhere, we are going to have to seriously downscale. And I don't think that the facts are put on the table that anyone is advocating that. But it's a very emotive argument that I have to make. But it would be wrong of me if I shy away from it as chief executive of the Processors and Exporters Association. I can't shy away from that, and I can only articulate it as it is. The Irish fishing industry has been disproportionately hit because of a decision taken at political level on the 24th of December 2020. That's going to have far-reaching and devastating consequences for us as processors, and admittedly also for the producers. But we have to, in the interim, we have to make every effort to source alternative supply of fish, be that from within the EU and our EU colleagues, be it Denmark or France or Spain, or outside of that through Norway. There's no other options, because if someone is suggesting we get it from Ireland, yes, we are available to buy every fish possible from all Irish vessels, but that's still not enough. We're still short 15%. So we have two choices. We downscale our processes and facilities, we close some of them, or we go on the open market to secure fish from those countries that have a surplus of fish. Now, no one can accuse me of being treasonous or disloyal or anything else. These are the facts that we're dealing with, and there's no way around it. There's no bypass option here. And we're going to have to, in order to sustain the processing sector until such time as there's clarity or a revisiting of these constraints. And when I talk about constraints, I'm talking clearly about the quota regime and or the outcomes of the TCA. I wish I could tell the listeners here that there's a third option or an easy option. There's not. And no one wants to be in this situation. No Irish processor wants to be in a situation where he goes to other countries to buy fish, knowing full well that most likely if he's buying it from the French or the Spanish, that those fish were caught in Irish waters anyway. So what effectively are we doing? We're buying back fish that is fish that was spawned and reared in Irish waters, but we're buying it back from another country. I wish I could say to you there's another way around this. There's not. And that's what is the gross unfairness of where we find ourselves as an industry, as a fishing industry, that we have no choice but to go out and buy fish back, albeit from another country, until such time as we fight the fight at European level. And I mean really fight the fight at European level rather than this tokenism that's gone on for the last 20 years. And we lay the cards on the table at European level as a united industry, but a united industry that has yet to get a backing of a government to do this. And I'm always critical of that. That is, in my view, and I come from a political background, that what we've seen in the last 20 years is tokenism, whereby, yeah, we'll make that case at European level. We'll make that case at European level. Whereas if you were a Dutch citizen, that would be making more than the case, that would be making damn sure that the Dutch would get a deal. Well, I would like that attitude to be instilled at our political level, that they would make damn sure that they're going to go out there and do something for the Irish industry.
Well, it's like I always say, I don't know what to do when they go to the Agri-Fish Council, or whether they're meeting, the Taoiseach's meeting with other European leaders, or whatever they do when they're out there. But surely, when you own something, and they've apparently, Sinkevičius admitted it when he was in Killybegs, that the fish in the Irish waters is Irish fish. Mm-hmm. So when we go out there, are we not saying we want this? Or what questions are being asked? You know, how are we demanding this? Like, or are we just going, please, sir, can we have this fish? You know, how is our leaders acting? This is the problem.
This is the problem, and I think we're the collateral damage, and I'll explain that before I walk myself into more trouble. And I'm going to try to avoid trouble in this interview, Oliver, but I think we're continuously the collateral damage. And what I mean by that is, you have a sector in agriculture that has probably 300,000 people employed, and then you have the business service sector that has maybe 500,000 people employed, and all the knock-ons for the economy general. And then you have the fishing sector that has a massive valued asset, although we don't value it, but the French covet it, the Spanish and the Belgians want it. And we're the collateral damage, whereby maybe in order to get a better deal at agricultural level or at services level for our service sector, be it banking or financial, a nugget is thrown from the Irish fish industry to the Belgians and French. And from that, then we get a better deal for the farmers and or the financial services sector. That's what is happening. That is what the French used to call realpolitik. And that is where we are. And until we move out of that position, it's going to be exactly the same. But I think what has happened here since December in particular, we've gone so far down, and we've been allowed to go so far down, and going back to the Eurostat figures, where we are now at the bottom of the league. I think that this government, or any successive government that will come after it, will have to take the conscious decision that we kick the Irish fishing industry so much that something's going to have to be done. And that's what we have to hold out for. It's as pathetic as that, but we have to hold out, and we have to stay united to that time that someone is going to take the initiative and say, well, here we have €1 billion industry, it's employing 16,000, but it's 16,000 spread around the coastal communities that are most in need of employment. Someone's going to take the initiative eventually and say, well, there is actually a lot more that we could do here. And there's a gross unfairness from the 1983 CFP and everything else in between. And that is what we have to do. Now, can we maneuver ourselves into a better position? Of course we can. And that's a body of work that I'm looking at different political options that's there. Because one of the difficulties, as I see it coming in as a fresh set of eyes into the industry, is that there isn't the same level of understanding in the general public as there is within the fishing industry of how harshly we've been treated, how badly we've been dealt with by our European colleagues, and how pathetically successive governments have handled the Irish fishing industry. So there's a body of work there that all of us need to focus on in order to make it a much stronger argument of how we need to come back from the position that we are. But be under no illusion, we're in as bad a position now as we have ever been, and every statistic that you can quote reflects that, and the frustration and anger levels are out there. But there's no use being frustrated or angry if you're not willing to do something about it. And that is what we, and I as a representative of the processing sector, must focus on in the time ahead, rather than any other diversionary or distractions that come along the way. We must remain very focused and remain set on one thing, and that is that we're at a critical junction in the fishing industry, that unless we pull together and unless we remain united and fight to a greater level than ever previously before, and engage at political level than ever previously before, then the road ahead is going to lead to destruction. But that's not the way I see it. The way I see it is that the mandate given to us by the march in Cork and the march in Dublin is very clear. The people that are engaged in the sector, the people that are working on the vessels and in the factories, want us to do better. And that's what I see within the task force when you look at the different initiatives that cover processing and the vessels and aquaculture and the community-led initiatives. That has to be the basis to start and to inject a new stimulus into the industry. But that's not going to be easy. But going down rabbit holes like what we've seen over the last 48 hours helps no one. That's a diversionary tactic that's going to end up bringing us back to where we were previously, and where we were previously was worse than where we are now, if that's humanly possible.
Brendan, some people will be saying that you're only doing this interview because of what Sean Moroney said at the end of his video documentary. He said that Irish fish processors will be relying on the Irish fishing industry until they get this whole dynamic fish processing plant set up down in Castletown Bear. Is that the reason why you're doing this interview today?
Not at all. In actual fact, you asked me to do this interview 3 weeks ago and we had to cancel it. The reason I'm doing this interview here today is very simple. It's very important that we remain focused on the Irish fishing industry. It's very important that we have clear sight of what we're at. And when I say clear sight of what we're at is we need to take a fundamental assessment of where we are. I have said it consistently in everything that I've said in interview and in everything I have written, be it in the Marine Times or the Skipper, that we are at the lowest point ever previously known in the Irish fishing industry. That at European level, we have slipped in the various tables and matrix that judge the maritime and coastal nations. We are slipping. We're in decline. But all that can be reversed if we unite, which we are, and we have an agreed focus on where we need to get to. And that is that we need to reset the dial in terms of how we're engaging at European level, because at present, we're not getting a level playing field from them. We're not getting our fair share from them. We're not even getting a listening from them. Those are the facts. And we can't allow this to continue as it has for the last 20 or 25 years. And until such time as we have real and meaningful engagement for all sectors at European level, this is going to continue on the way that it has. Now, have I said anything differently at this interview than a previous interview that I would have given to you, Oliver? No, I haven't. I'm very consistent in where I'm going. And where I'm going is our problems are twofold. One, we're not getting the traction that we should do nationally at government level within our own country. That has to be sorted. Those are the exact same words I said when I spoke to you last. We have to sort that out first. If we sort that out, then we're in a position that we bring our argument to European level, because at European level, there lies the solution to all our problems. The problems that we have are very simple. We're surrounded by 12% of the EU water that's stocked with all kinds of species that every other coastal nation in Europe wants. We don't have the right to catch that fish. Who denies us the right to catch that fish is the EU. But we have to go there united and fully supported by our own government in order to have any chance to claw back the losses that we have sustained since we joined the EU in 1973. That is the purpose of where I am here. anything that has happened in the last 48 hours is an unnecessary distraction that I will not allow to over focus where we are going. We have to travel this path and we have to fight back. But in order to fight back, come what may, we need to be focused on what's involved in doing that. And what's involved in doing that is, one, get our own house in order, two, go as a united front at political level and at industry level to Europe and have a real and meaningful engagement with them that we never previously had in our 48 years membership of EEC and or the EU, whatever the case may be.
Do we need another protest like Dublin?
Not until such time as we have a better inroad or a better traction with the government. We have brought the people of our coastal communities in the fishing industry out twice, in Cork and in Dublin. I've written in different writings that I've given, I think we have let those people down because we have failed in the intervening period to get real and meaningful engagement with the government and the Minister of the Day. As a representative of any industry, and I'm here as a representative of the processing, we have to win our argument at national level. We've failed to do that as representatives of the fishing community. So that is the first thing that we need to give more focus and attention to in the interim. Yes, it will involve further protest, and that is a very important part of it. But it's no point having protests for the sake of protest. Protests are a demonstration of the anger and frustration there is there in the fishing community and the broader fishing industry. That's still there. It's got worse, actually, because not alone has there been no engagement at political level of a real and meaningful nature that has clear, tangible, outward demonstration that they're listening. But in my view, and I'm being self-critical of myself here, I think we should have done more and we can still do more. But that is an argument for another place. But yes, there will have to be more demonstration. But meanwhile, the government of the day have to be brought to task and held to account. That's not me being radical. That's me exercising my political thought process. And that's what governments are there for. And that's what representative bodies such as ours are there for to do, to lobby, to strengthen the position of the sector that you represent. And we haven't done that.
Brendan, thank you very much for joining me today. As usual, it's been a very interesting chat. Hopefully we'll have you on soon again and discuss things further.
Thank you very much, Oliver. Thank you.